This is a 1993 Hamer Special, and when I got this guitar it arrived with some heavy shipping damage. It has two cracks right in the neck, and in this video I'm going to fix these and make the guitar playable again. So starting at the headstock, it has a crack that runs from right under the nut to around the area of the second fret. It's just a fine hairline crack, and you might think it's just in the finish, but it is a crack in the wood, and I can show you later as I start flexing and bending the neck a bit. It's visible from both sides, and there's also a bit of finish coming off from the sides of the fretboard. But the main damage has been done right at the neck heel, where the neck has been brutally broken out of the pocket. And quite obviously this is not going to be an easy fix because there's a considerable amount of finish missing, and the repair also has to be structurally very strong to hold the tension of the strings. So I'm starting off taking the neck pickup out, because the neck seemed to be still kind of attached to the body, but my guess was that it has actually been broken completely, and that did turn out to be true. So it was just the neck pickup pushing against the edge of the neck that was still kind of holding it in place. This guitar has a tenon that goes up into the pickup cavity, and as you can tell there's not a lot of wood there anyway, so it's not the most stable design to begin with. It's very similar to an SG, and you could argue that this has been a kind of misconstruction from the beginning, just because there's so little wood holding this neck in place. Now I had to carefully pull the neck out of the pocket, and I'm going back and forth a bit because it's still sitting in there relatively tight, but it is fully broken. And I think that's actually a good thing, because that allows me to clean up the surface areas properly and get this to fit back together well. The break is relatively clean, and the gluing area is not exactly large, but I think it will be enough to make this a stable guitar again. And you can see that it's really the neck that broke in two. The tenon wasn't damaged at all. And also the neck came out of the sides of the neck pocket relatively clean, so it basically broke out the way it was glued in from the sides, but at the bottom it just broke in two. Having the neck off the guitar, I decided to take care of the crack up in the neck first, because that would be more comfortable to fix this way. And I'm sort of bending and flexing the area a bit so you can see that there's movement here, so it is a crack in the wood and not just in the finish. In preparation, I put some protective foil around the broken area at the neck so that I wouldn't accidentally change or damage anything, and I took off both the truss rod nut as well as the nut. The crack up in the neck was very tight, and it would be quite hard to get any glue to wick in there. So I built a little setup where I put the neck into the bench vise and built this wooden little thingy where I could use a clamp to slowly and in a very controlled way exert some pressure on the headstock to slightly open up the crack. Here I'm starting to slightly tension the clamp, and you can slowly see the crack opening up. You can also see how much the neck is bending backwards, so that tells you how tight this crack actually is. I had to put quite a bit of pressure on it just to get this to open up a little bit, but it was necessary so I could then get some glue in there. I could get the crack to open up just enough that I could get in there with a little syringe and inject some glue. I spent quite a bit of time thinking about which adhesive to use to fix this crack, because with this crack being so tight, regular wood glue would be way too thick to properly wick in there, but it is quite important to reach the whole break area and seal it up properly so that it doesn't extend any further. I did think about using super glue, but decided against it because there's the considerable risk of gluing the truss rod in place, so that would be very bad and a much larger issue to fix later. So I did decide to stick with the wood glue, and I used Titebond Original but I thinned it down with some water to make it flow a little better. It is a water-soluble glue, and you can do that. It will obviously reduce the bonding strength though. But with this particular crack, I thought this would not be a problem, because this is quite different than your typical headstock break, just as the crack runs in the opposite direction. So what you get with your typical headstock break is that the tension of the strings would try to pull it apart. But with this crack running from behind the nut and not being fully broken, the string tension actually pulls it together, so this repair doesn't have to be structurally as strong as your typical headstock repair. So that's a good thing, and I think it's safe to go with the thinned down tight bond. Here I go about injecting the glue into the crack. It was possible to reach down there quite a bit with a syringe, and I injected quite a bit of glue. There was lots of squeeze out coming from the base side of the neck, which you can't see from this camera perspective. And I did that a couple of times, so I would push some glue in there and wipe away some of the excess and do it again just to make sure that the glue really wicks into the whole crack area and seals it up properly. As you might remember, I had this little setup where I pulled the neck backwards a bit to get the crack to open up, and here I'm releasing the pressure from the clamp, which causes the crack to close itself. And there comes the squeeze out. So this really worked like a charm, and I think the glue really got to all the places that it was supposed to go. I decided to go with surgical tubing as a clamp, because it puts pressure on the neck in a more even and controlled way. After a day of drying time, I cleaned up the remains of the glue with some wet paper towel. The crack came together perfectly flush, being barely visible and palpable. I ran some super glue down the repair lines to seal everything up and to repair the finish a little bit. The lacquer at the edge of the headstock had been broken off. When the guitar arrived, it was chipped slightly, and I only had to touch it and it came off immediately, so I glued that back on and later sanded it and polished it up again. With the hairline crack being fixed, it was now time to take care of the big repair, gluing the neck back in place. I took out the neck pickup just so it wouldn't get in my way, and just in case you were wondering, this Hamer guitar originally came with Seymour Duncan P90 pickups. When inspecting the broken off neck, I had to realize that there was another thin hairline crack going through the broken area, and I definitely had to fix this in some way, but this crack really was so tight that it would have been impossible to fix it with wood glue, so I did decide to go with CA this time. In terms of stability, I did stability tests on some spare pieces of mahogany that I had, and the super glue that I had was very strong. I wasn't able to break the joint, I broke the wood in two, so I was confident at that point that the super glue would be strong enough to fix this little hairline crack. As I clamped this up, you can see a bit of squeeze out coming out, so that's a good thing because it means that the super glue probably was successful in terms of penetrating the whole area of the hairline crack. With the gluable surface not being exactly large, and this being a very important part of the guitar that has to be super strong, the question arose whether it would be enough to just glue it back together. And I did a bit of research, and I interestingly found a very similar repair case showcased by Chicago Fretworks on their virtual workbench. They also had a Hamer special where the neck broke off in a very similar way. The break looks almost identical actually, and they just glued it back together and it worked out fine, so I decided to take the chance and do it the same way. I once again used Titebond Original to glue the two pieces back together, and I very generously apply the glue here just to make sure that there's enough. You can always wipe some excess away later, but better too much glue than too little. And there are 3 steps that I did take before gluing this back together that I just wanted to talk about here because I didn't film them, but these are very important, I believe. So first I inspected the 2 broken areas very carefully. That is because sometimes when wood breaks, there are loose fibers or crushed fibers that will get in the way when you try to fit the 2 parts back together. And there were just a few spots, some tiny little pieces of crushed grain that I had to carefully remove just to make sure that the 2 pieces fit together perfectly and there's no alignment issues later. The second thing I did was I removed some of the glue residue from the sides of the neck and the side of the neck pocket. As I said earlier, the neck basically broke in 2, but sideways it broke out the way it was glued in. So that means that there's old glue on the sides, and putting glue on glue doesn't create the most strong connection. So I sanded that down very lightly and carefully to make sure that the new glue would have something to stick to. And the third thing I did before gluing this back together was I dry fitted everything. So I put the 2 pieces together and clamped them up just to see if everything aligns properly and everything works out the way I wanted it to. As I put the neck back in, I use my finger to carefully feel the inside of the pickup cavity, sort of using this as a guide to align the 2 pieces, just to make sure that the neck sits in right and doesn't sit in too far or too shy in the neck pocket. I clamped this using 3 standard clamps and some cork-padded pieces of wood that I prepared before. And I let this dry for around 24 hours before I removed the clamps. The 2 parts came together just right, and at that point I was confident the whole repair would turn out successful. One sort of annoying thing that I still had to take care of were the missing pieces of finish. I decided to first seal up the area with some super glue and also use the super glue to build sort of a layer of new finish. So you can use regular CA glue to create a plasticky kind of finish that you can easily sand and polish, and I decided to just use this to sort of fill the gaps there and later touch it up with some color. I smoothed out the area with some 320 grit sandpaper and later used some steel wool to take out some of the scratches that the sandpaper left and to prepare the surface for a little coat of lacquer. I found that a brownish reddish permanent marker that I had was a pretty good color match for the missing pieces of finish, and I put on a couple of applications there and slightly smooth them out with some steel wool again, just trying to darken the area a little bit. This is how it turned out, and this was just in preparation to put some coats of tinted lacquer over it, trying to conceal the repair a little bit more. I taped off the guitar so I could just refinish the damaged area, and because it would be kind of hard to blend the 2 finishes together, I tried to go with a little bit of a burst look and used a piece of cardboard and sort of folded it over the neck so it wouldn't fully cover the neck, so a bit of lacquer would get underneath and create a bit of a burst look. I hit the area with some Heritage Cherry. I think I used 6 or 7 coats with 20 minutes in between the coats. It turned out a little bit darker as expected, and I then had to sand down a bit of orange peel and polish it up again. So this is the result. Personally, I'm very satisfied with how it turned out. Of course, you will always see that this is a repaired instrument, but I think you can also tell that somebody did their best to take care of it. So here are some before and after pics. I'm very happy with how all of this turned out. The strings went on with no problem whatsoever. The repair is very solid and stable. The guitar stays in tune. It sounds and plays the way it should. I will leave it at that, so if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and at the end, of course, there's going to be a little bit of playing.